Chapter 6. A continuation of the Reminiscences of John Watson, M.D. Our prisoner's furious resistance did not apparently indicate any ferocity in his disposition towards ourselves. On finding himself powerless, he smiled in an affable manner, and expressed his hopes that he had not hurt any of us in the scuffle. "I guess you're going to take me to the police station," he remarked to Sherlock Holmes. "My cab's at the door, and if you'll loose my legs, I'll walk down to it. I'm not so light to lift as I used to be." Gregson and Lestrade exchanged glances, as if they thought this proposition was a rather bold one. But Holmes at once took the prisoner at his word and loosened the towel which he had bound around his ankles. He rose and stretched his legs, as though to assure himself that they were once free. I remember that I thought to myself, as I eyed him, that I had seldom seen a more powerfully built man, and his dark, sunburned face bore an expression of determination and energy which was as formidable as his personal strength. "If there's a vacant place for the chief of the police, I reckon you are the man for it," he said, gazing at the undisguised admiration of my fellow lodger. "The way you kept my trail was as a caution." "You had better come with me," said Holmes to the two detectives. "I can drive you," said Lestrade. "Good. And Gregson, can you come inside with me? You too, Doctor. You have taken an interest in this case, and may as well stick to us." I assented gladly, as we all descended together. Our prisoner made no attempt at escape, but stepped calmly into the cab which had been his, and we followed him. Lestrade mounted the box and whipped up the horse, and brought us in a very short time to the destination. We were ushered into a small chamber where the police inspector noted down our prisoner's name and the names of the men with whom the murder had been charged. The official was a white-faced, unemotional man, who had seen his duties in a dull, mechanical way. "The prisoner will be put before the magistrates in the court of the week," he said. "In the meantime, Mr. Jefferson Hope, have you anything that you wish to say? I must warn you that your words will be taken down and may be used against you." "I've got a good deal to say," our prisoner said slowly. "I want to tell you gentlemen all about it." "Hadn't you better reserve that for your trial?" asked the inspector. "I may never be tried," he answered. "You needn't look startled. It isn't suicide I'm thinking of. Are you a doctor?" He turned his fierce dark eyes to me and asked his last question. "Yes, I am," I answered. "Then put your hand here," he said with a smile, motioning to his manacled wrists toward his chest. I did so, and became at once conscious of an extraordinary throbbing and commotion which was going on inside. The walls of his chest seemed to thrill and quiver as a frail building would do inside of some powerful engine was at work. In the silence of the room I could hear a dull humming and buzzing noise which proceeded from the same source. "Why," I cried, "you have an aortic aneurysm!" "That's what they call it," he said placidly. "I went to the doctor's last week about it, and he told me it was bound to burst before many days passed. And it's been getting worse for years. I got it from overexposure and underfeeding among the Salt Lake Mountains. I've done my work now, and all I don't care how soon I go. I should like to leave an account of my business behind me. I don't want to be remembered as a common cutthroat." The inspector and the two detectives had a hurried discussion to the advisability of allowing him to tell his story. "Do you consider, Doctor, that there is an imminent danger?" the former asked. "Oh, certainly there is," I answered. "In that case, it is clearly our duty, in the interests of justice, to take a statement," said the inspector. "You are at liberty, sir, to give your account, which I again warn you will be taken down." "I'll sit down and leave you a peace," said the prisoner, suiting every action to the word. "This engine of mine makes me easily tired, and the tussle we had half an hour ago has not mended matters. I'm on the brink of the grave, and am not likely to lie to you. Every word I say will be the absolute truth, and how you use it is a matter of no consequence to me." With these words, Jefferson Hope leaned back in a chair and began the following remarkable statement. He spoke in a calm and methodical manner, although the events which he narrated were commonplace enough. I can vouch for the accuracy of the subjoined account, for I have had access to Lestrade's notebook, in which the prisoner's words were taken down exactly as they were uttered. "It don't matter much why you hated these men," he said. "It's enough that they were guilty of the death of two human beings, a father and a daughter, and that they had, therefore, forfeited their own lives. After a lapse of time that had passed since their crime, it was impossible for me to secure a conviction against them in any court. I knew of their guilt, though, and I determined that I should be the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one. You'd have done the same if you had been any manhood in you, if you had any been in my place. That girl I spoke of was to be married to me 20 years ago. She was forced into marrying that same Drebber, and broke her heart over it. I took the marriage ring from her dead finger, and I vowed that his dying eyes should rest upon that very ring, and that his last thoughts should be of the crime for which he is punished. I have carried it about me, and have followed him and his accomplice over 2 continents until I caught them. They thought to tire me out, but they could not do it. If I die tomorrow, as it is likely enough, I die knowing that my work in this world is done, and well done. They have perished, and by my hand. There's nothing left for me to hope for, or to desire. They were rich, and I was poor, so that is no easy matter for me to follow them. When I got to London, my pocket was about empty, and I found that I must turn my hand into something for a living. Driving and riding are all natural to me as walking, so I applied at the cab owner's office and got soon employment. I was to bring a certain sum a week to the owner, and whatever was left over, that I might keep for myself. There was seldom much over, but I managed to scrape along somehow. The hardest job was to learn my way about, for I reckon that of all the mazes that were ever contrived, this city is among the most confusing. I had a map beside me, though, and once I got spotted the principal hotels and stations, I got on pretty well. It was some time before I found out where the 2 gentlemen were living, but I inquired and inquired until I at last dropped across them. They were at a boarding house in Camberwell, over on the other side of the river. When once I found them out, I knew that I had them at my mercy. I had grown my beard, and there was no chance of their recognizing me. I would dog them and follow them until I saw my opportunity, and I was determined that they should not escape me again. They were very near doing it, for all that. Go where they would about London, I always at their heels. Sometimes I followed them on my cab, and sometimes on foot, but the former was the best, for then they could not get away from me. It was only early in the morning or late at night that I could earn anything, so that I began to get behindhand with my employer. I did not mind that, however, as long as I could lay my hand upon the men I wanted. They were very cunning, though. They must have thought that there was some chance of their being followed, for they would never go out alone, and never after nightfall. During 2 weeks I drove behind them every day, and never once saw them separate. Drebber himself was drunk half the time, but Strangerson was not to be caught napping. I watched them late and early, but never saw the ghost of a chance. But I was not discouraged for anything. Something told me that the hour was almost come. My only fear was that this thing in my chest might burst a little too soon and leave my work undone. At last, one evening, I was driving up and down Torquay Terrace, as the street was called when they boarded, when I saw a cab drive up to their door. Presently, some luggage was brought out, and after a time, Drebber and Stegerson followed it and drove off. I whipped up my horse and kept them within sight, feeling very ill at ease, for I feared that they were going to shift their quarters. At Euston Station they got out, and I left a boy to hold my horse and followed them on the platform. I heard them ask for a Liverpool train, and the guard answered that one of them had just gone, and there would not yet be another for some hours. Staggerson seemed to put out at that, but Drebber was rather pleased than otherwise. so I got close to them in the bustle and I could hear every word that passed between them. Drebber said that he had a little business of his own to do, and that if the other would wait for him, he would soon rejoin him. His companion remonstrated with him and reminded him that they were resolved to stay together. Drebber answered that matter with a dogged one, and he must go alone. I could not catch what Staggerson was said to do, but the other burst out swearing and reminded him that he was nothing more than his paid servant, and that he must not presume to dictate to him. On that, the secretary gave it up as a bad job and simply bargained with him that if he missed the last train, he would rejoin him at Holliday's private hotel, to which Drebin answered that he would be back on the platform before 11, and made his way out of the station. The moment for which I had waited was so at hand and had long at last come. I had my enemies within my power. Together they could protect each other, but singly they were at my mercy. I did not act, however, with undue precipitation. My plans were already formed. There was no satisfaction in vengeance unless the offender has time to realize who it was that strikes him, and why retribution was come upon him. I had my plans arranged by which I should have the opportunity of making the man who had wronged me understand that his old sin had found him. It chanced that some days before, a gentleman who had been engaged in looking over some houses in Brixton Road had dropped the key of one of them in my carriage. It was claimed that same evening and returned. But in the interval I had taken a molding of it and had a duplicate constructed. By means of this I had access to at least one spot in the great city I could rely upon being free from interruption. How to get Drebber to that house was a difficult problem which I now had to solve. He walked down the road and went into one of the liquor shops, staying for nearly half an hour in the last of them. When he came out, he staggered in his walk and was evidently pretty well on. There was a hansom just in front of me, and he hailed it. I followed so close that the nose of the horse was within a yard of his driver the whole way. We rattled across Waterloo Bridge and through miles of streets until, to my astonishment, we found ourselves back at the terrace in which he had boarded. I could not imagine what his intention was in returning there, but I went in and pulled my cab 100 yards or so from the house. He entered it, and his hansom drove away. "Give me a glass of water, if you please. My mouth is getting cut after talking." I handed him the glass, and he drank it down. "That's better," he said. "Well, I waited for a quarter of an hour or more, when suddenly there came a noise like people struggling inside the house. Next moment the door was flung open and two men appeared, one of whom was Drebber, and the other was a young man whom I had never seen before. This fellow had Drebber by the collar, and when they came to the head of the steps he gave him a shove and a kick that sent him halfway across the road. "You hound!" he cried, shaking his stick at him. "I'll teach you to insult an honest girl." He was so hot that I think he would have thrashed Drebber with his cudgel, only that the cur staggered away down the road as fast as his legs would carry him. He ran as far as the corner, and then seeing my cab, he hailed me and jumped in. "Drive me to Holiday's private hotel," he said. When I had him fairly inside my cab, my heart jumped with joy that I feared lest at his last moment an aneurysm might go wrong. I drove along slowly, weighing in my own mind what was best to do. I might take him right out of the country, and there in some deserted lane have his last interview with him. I had almost decided upon this when he solved the problem for me. The craze of his drink had seized him again, and he ordered me to pull outside the gin palace. He went in, leaving word that I should wait for him. There he remained until closing time, and when he came out he was so far gone that I knew the game was in my own hands. Don't imagine that I intended to kill him in cold blood. It would only have been a rigid justice if I had done so. But I could not bring myself to do it. I had long determined that he should have a show of his life if he chose to take advantage of it. Among the many billets which I had filled in America during my wandering life, I was once a janitor and sweeper out of a laboratory in New York College. One day the professor was lecturing on poisons, and he showed which students with some alkali, as he called it, and which some had extracted from South American arrow poison. and which was so powerful that the least grain meant instant death. I spotted the bottle which was the preparation kept, and when they were all gone, I helped myself to a little of it. I was a fairly good dispenser, so I worked the alkaloid into a small, soluble pill, and each pill I put in the box of a similar pill made without the poison. I determined at that time when I had the chance my gentlemen should each have a draw out of one of these little boxes, while I ate the pill that remained. It would be quite as deadly and a good deal less noisy than firing across a handkerchief. From that day I had always the pill boxes about with me, and the time had now come when I was to use them. It was nearer 1 than 12 when a wild, bleak night blowing hard and raining in torrents. Dismal as it was outside, I was glad within, so glad that I could have shouted out of pure exultation. If any of you gentlemen have ever pined for a thing and longed for it for 20 years long, and then suddenly found it within your reach, you would understand my feelings. I lit a cigar and puffed at it steadily to calm my nerves. My hand was trembling, and temp was throbbing with excitement. As I drove, I could see old John Ferrier and sweet Lucy looking at me in the darkness and smiling at me, just as plain as I see all you in this room. All the way they were ahead of me, one on each side of the horse, till I pulled up at the house at Brixton Road. There was not a soul to be seen, nor a sound to be heard, except the dripping of the rain. When I looked in at the window, I found Drebber all huddled together in a drunken sleep. I shook him by the arm. "It's time to get out," I said. "All right, cabby," he said. I suppose he thought we had come to the hotel that he had mentioned, and he got out without another word and followed me down the garden. I had to walk beside him to keep him steady, for he was a little top-heavy. When we came to the door, I opened it and led him to the front room. I give my word that all that way the father and the daughter were walking in front of us. "It's infernal dark," he said, stamping about. "I'll soon have a light," I said, striking a match and putting it to the wax candle which I had brought with me. "Now, knock Drebber," I continued, turning to him and holding the light to my own face. "Who am I?" He gazed at me with bleary, drunken eyes for a moment, and then I saw the horror spring up in him and convulse his whole features. It showed me that he knew me. He staggered back with a livid face, and I saw the perspiration break out upon his brow, while his teeth clattered in his head. At the sight, I leaned back against the door and laughed loud and long. I'd always known that vengeance would be sweet, but I'd never hoped for this contentment of soul which was now possessing me. "You dog," I said, "I've hunted you from Salt Lake to St. Petersburg, and you've always escaped me. Now at last your wanderings have come to an end, for either you or I shall never see tomorrow's sunrise." He shrunk still farther away as I spoke, and I could see on his face that he had thought I was mad. So I was for the time. The pulses in my temples beat like sledgehammers, and I believe I could have had a fit of some sort if the blood had not been gushed out of my nose and relieving me. "What do you think of Lucy Ferrier now?" I cried, locking the door and shaking the key in his face. "Punishment has been slow in coming, but if it has overtaken you at last—" I saw his coward lips tremble when I spoke. He would have begged for his life, but he knew well that it was useless. "Would you murder me?" he stammered. "There is no murder," I answered. "Who talks of murdering a mad dog? What mercy had you upon my poor darling when you dragged her from her slaughtered father and bore her away on your accursed and shameless harem?" "I was not the one who killed her father," he cried. "But it was you who broke her innocent heart," I shrieked, thrusting the box before him. "Let the high God judge between us. Choose and eat. There's death in one and life in the other. I shall take what you leave. Let us see if there is injustice on this earth, or if we are ruled by chance." He cowered away with wild cries for mercy and prayers, but I drew my knife and held it to his throat until he had obeyed me. Then I swallowed the other one, and we stood facing one another in silence for a minute or more. waiting to see which was to live and which was to die. Shall I ever forget the look which came over his face when the first warning's pain told him that the poison was in his system? I laughed when I saw it, and I held Lucy's marriage ring in front of his eyes. It was but for a moment, for the action was rapid. A spasm of pain contorted his features. He threw out his hands in front of him and staggered, and then, with a hoarse cry, fell heavily upon the floor. I turned him over with my foot and placed my hand on his heart. There was no movement. He was dead. The blood had been streaming from my nose, but I had taken no notice of it. I don't know what it is to put that into my head to write upon the wall with it. Perhaps it was some mischievous idea of setting the police upon a wrong track, for I felt light-hearted and cheerful. I remembered a German being found in New York with the Rachi written above him, and was argued at the time of the newspapers that the secret societies must have done it. I guess that what puzzled the New Yorkers would puzzle the Londoners, so I dipped my finger in my own blood and printed it on the convenient place in the wall. Then I walked down to my cab and found that there was nobody about, and what the night was still very wild. I had driven some distance when I put my hand in my pocket, in which I had usually kept my Lucy's ring, and found that it was not there. I was thunderstruck at this, for it was my only memento that I had of her. Thinking that I might have dropped it when I stooped over Drebber's body, I drove back, and leaving my cab in the side street, I went boldly up to the house, for I was ready to dare anything and to lose the ring. When I arrived there, I walked right into the arms of a police officer who was coming out, and had only managed to disarm the suspicions by pretending to be a hopeless drunk. That was how Enoch Drebber came to his end. All I had to do then was to find Staggerson, and so pay off John Ferrier's debt. I knew that he was staying at the Holiday's private hotel, and I hung about it all day, but he never came out. I fancied that he suspected something of Drebber's failed to put in appearance. He was cunning, that Staggerson, and always on guard. If he thought he could keep me off from staying indoors, he was very much mistaken. I soon found out which was the window of his bedroom, and early in the next morning I took advantage of some ladders which were lying on the lane behind the hotel, so I made my way up into his room in the gray of the dawn. I woke him up and told him that the hour had come when he was to answer for the life that he had taken so long ago. I described Drebber's death to him, and gave him a chance the same choice of the poison pills. Instead of grasping at the chance of safety which that offered him, he sprang from his bed and flew at my throat. In self-defense, I stabbed him to the heart. I would have been the same in any case, for Providence would never have allowed his guilty hand to pick out anything but the poison. I have little more to say, that's as well, for I am about done up. I went on cabbing it for a day or so, intending to keep it until I could save enough to take me back to America. I was standing in the yard when the ragged youngsters asked if there was a cabbie there called Jefferson Hope, and said that his cab was wanted by a gentleman at 221B Baker Street. I went round suspecting no harm, and the next thing I knew, this young man here had the bracelets on my wrists, and was neatly shackled as ever I saw in my life. That's the whole story, my gentlemen. You may consider me to be a murderer, but I hold that I am such an officer of justice as you are. So thrilling had the man's narrative been that his manager was so impressive that we had sat silent and absorbed. Even the professional detectives, blasé as they were in every detail of crime, appeared to be keenly interested in this man's story. When he had finished, we sat for some minutes in the stillness, which was only broken by the scratching of Lestrade's pencil as he gave the finishing touches to his shorthand account. "There is only one point on which I would like a little more information," Sherlock Holmes said at last. "Who was your accomplice? Who came for the ring which I had advertised?" The prisoner winked at my friend jocosely. "I can tell my own secrets," he said, "but I don't want to get other people into trouble. I saw your advertisement and thought it might be a plant, or it might be the ring which I wanted. My friend volunteered to go and see. I think you'll own he did it smartly." No doubt of that, said Holmes heartily. Now, gentlemen, the inspector remarked gravely, the forms of the law must be completed with. On Thursday, the prisoner will be brought before the magistrates, and your attendance will be required. Until then, I will be responsible for him. He rang a bell as he spoke, and Jefferson Hope was led off by a couple of wanderers, while my friend and I made our way back to the station and took a cab back to Baker Street.